Most people would say that walking into a room full of apex predators without a silver-plated death wish is a reckless choice. I call it efficient scheduling. I had exactly 12 minutes before my next appointment, and Dominic Volkov owed me 3 years of tax returns and a very specific signature. I didn't care if he was currently hosting a summit of the city's most feared alphas. In fact, the more of them in the room, the fewer I'd have to track down later. I didn't need a map or an invitation. I just needed to look like I'd fire anyone who got in my way. It's amazing how far a sharp blazer and a look of pure, concentrated annoyance can get you. Welcome back to Z's Romance. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more of the sizzling romance you love. Settle in, get comfortable. Let's find out what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable queen. Chapter 1. The Audit from Hell. I didn't knock. Knocking gives people time to prepare their no, and I've never been a fan of the word. The heavy mahogany doors of the Volkov penthouse suite swung open with a groan that sounded suspiciously like a warning. Inside, the air didn't just feel thick, it felt pressurized, like the cabin of a plane about to lose its engines. 12 men sat around a table that cost more than my college tuition, and every single one of them looked like they'd been carved out of granite and bad intentions. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a mauling. Section 4B, paragraph 12, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy musk of expensive cologne and unspoken threats. I marched straight to the head of the table, ignoring the way the man to my left let out a low, vibrating rumble that made my teeth ache. You're missing a signature, Mr. Volkov, and since your secretary seems to think you're a ghost, I decided to come see the haunting for myself. I dropped the heavy leather folder right in front of the man at the head of the table. Dominic Volkov didn't move. He didn't even blink. He was leaning back, his large scarred hands resting on the arms of his chair. He looked more like a mountain that had decided to wear a three-piece suit. His eyes weren't glowing, thank God for small mercies, but they were the color of dark whiskey, and they were currently burning a hole through my forehead. "You're late," I added, checking my watch and leaning over his desk, effectively invading the personal space of a man who supposedly broke bones for fun. A man down the table, a brute with a neck wider than my waist, stood up. "Do you have any idea who—" "A man who can't read a sign here sticker," I interrupted, finally looking at the brute. "Because that's all I see. Sit down, Sparky. The adults are talking." The room inhaled sharply. I could almost hear the biological gears shifting in their chests. These weren't just men, they were wolves, and I had just swatted the king on the nose with a rolled-up newspaper. Dominic finally moved. He didn't stand, he simply leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow that swallowed me whole. The scent of him hit me like a physical blow. Sandalwood, rain, and something raw that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't fear, it was a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity. "You're the auditor," he rumbled. His voice was a low, velvety sandpaper that seemed to vibrate in my very marrow. He didn't look irritated anymore. He looked hungry. "I'm the woman who's going to freeze your assets if you don't pick up that pen," I shot back, refusing to step away from the heat radiating off him. Dominic's lip curled into the smallest, most dangerous smirk I had ever seen. He didn't reach for the pen. Instead, his hand shot out, his fingers wrapping firmly around my waist and pulling me flush against his desk, and him. The folder slid to the floor, forgotten. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my gaze locked on his. I didn't pull away. I leaned closer, my breath hitching as his thumb traced the line of my hip with a possessiveness that felt like a brand. "The audit just became a private matter," Dominic whispered, his eyes scanning my face with a predatory intensity that made the rest of the room vanish. "Gentlemen, leave, now." As the most powerful men in the city scrambled to exit, Dominic didn't take his eyes off me. He didn't sign the paper. He just pulled me closer until I was forced to rest my hands on his broad shoulders for balance, his grip tightening as the door clicked shut. "Now," he growled, his face inches from mine. "Tell me again what you're going to freeze, Petra?" Chapter 2. Private Delinquency. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the silent penthouse. Dominic's hand was a warm, heavy weight against my hip. His fingers splayed across the fabric of my blazer with a casual arrogance that made my blood simmer. "I asked you a question, Petra," he murmured. The vibration of his voice traveled through the desk, through my thighs, and straight up my spine. "You were going to freeze my assets? That's a very bold claim for someone whose heart is currently trying to beat its way out of her chest." I didn't pull back. If anything, I leaned into his face, my palms flat against his silk-covered shoulders. He felt like he was made of iron and high-voltage wire. He smelled like a forest after a fire, charred, fresh, and dangerous. "You think your heart might give away your nerves? Most people forget how to breathe when I look at them like this. You just get meaner." "I have a low tolerance for bullies in expensive tailoring," I snapped, though my voice was a breathy shadow of its usual self. "Sign the papers. I have a dinner reservation at 8, and I'm not missing my appetizers because you want to play King of the Hill." Dominic let out a sound that was half chuckle, half growl. It was a dark, rich sound that made my toes curl in my heels. "You think this is a game? I could have you removed from this building in seconds. I could have your firm blacklisted before you hit the lobby." "Then do it," I challenged, my chin lifting. "But we both know you won't. You're bored, Dominic. You've spent so long being the biggest wolf in the woods that you've forgotten what it feels like to have someone snap back at you. You don't want me gone. You want to see if you can make me blink." His grip tightened, pulling me so close that our heartbeats began to sync in a frantic, uneven rhythm. His gaze dropped to my lips, and for a second, the air between us was so hot I thought the sprinkler system might go off. The irritation I'd seen earlier had morphed into something far more predatory and focused. "Careful," he whispered, his breath ghosting over my skin. "I might just take that as an invitation to see what else it takes to break that composure of yours." He reached out with his free hand, his knuckles grazing my jawline. The contact sent a jolt through me that was purely biological, a frantic fight-or-flight response that my body was confusing for stay and see what happens. I reached for the pen on the desk, my fingers trembling just enough to be annoying, and shoved it toward his chest. "Sign the paper." Dominic looked at the pen, then back at me, a slow, wicked grin spreading across his face. He took the pen, but he didn't sign the audit folder. Instead, he grabbed my hand, pressing the pen into my palm and closing my fingers over it. "I'll sign," he said, his voice dropping to a register that felt like a physical caress. "This audit is going to be thorough, Petra, very thorough. And since you're so worried about my assets, you're going to stay here until every single one of them has been personally inspected by you." He let go of my waist so abruptly I almost stumbled, but before I could regain my footing, he pressed a button on the intercom. "Marcus," he spoke into the intercom, his eyes never leaving mine. "Cancel my meetings for the week and send up a tailor. Ms. Petra will be staying in the guest suite. She seems to think I'm hiding something, and I'd hate to disappoint a lady with such high standards." I stared at him, my mouth slightly agape. "I have an apartment and a life. I'm not staying in your gilded cage." Dominic stepped around the desk, his presence swallowing the room again. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of my ear. "You wanted the truth behind the Volkov accounts? This is the only way you get it. Unless, of course, you're finally admitting that you're afraid of me." I felt the trap snap shut. It wasn't a cage, it was a dare, and I had never backed down from a dare in my life. "Fine," I whispered, turning my head to meet his gaze. Dominic smiled, and this time it was the look of a wolf who had just found a playmate worth keeping. Oh, I'm counting on it. The door opened, and a frantic-looking assistant stepped in with a stack of luggage that looked suspiciously like my own. I turned, my heart stopping. How did you— I told you, Petra. I'm very efficient. Now, get settled. We have a lot of figures to go over. Chapter 3. The Scent of Provocation. The guest suite was larger than my entire apartment, decorated in shades of slate and midnight blue that screamed expensive masculinity. I didn't spend time admiring the view. I spent it pacing the silk rug, fuming. Dominic Volkov was a manipulative, overbearing, ridiculously attractive ego with a suit, and I was currently his guest. I had tried the door 10 minutes ago. It wasn't locked, which was almost more insulting. He knew I wouldn't leave. He knew that the moment he suggested I was afraid, I'd stay just to prove him wrong. He was playing me, and the worst part was that it was working. A soft knock at the door preceded a woman in a sharp uniform, carrying a garment bag. "Mr. Volkov requested you change for dinner, Miss Petra. 8 o'clock in the private dining room." "I have my own clothes," I said, eyeing the bag suspiciously. "Mr. Volkov was quite specific," she replied with a neutral smile. When she left, I unzipped the bag. It wasn't a dress. It was a deep emerald silk jumpsuit, tailored so perfectly it looked like it would feel like a second skin. It was modest, professional, and yet somehow the most erotic thing I had ever laid eyes on. He wasn't trying to put me in a cocktail dress like a trophy. He was dressing me like a partner. I put it on. The silk was cool against my skin, but as I caught my reflection in the mirror, I felt a flush that had nothing to do with the temperature. I looked like a woman who was about to take over a kingdom, or burn one down. I found the private dining room by following the scent of cedarwood and searing steak. The room was candlelit, not for romance, it seemed, but because the Alpha King preferred the shadows. Dominic was already there, his jacket discarded, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal thick, corded forearms covered in faint, silvery scars. He was pouring wine, his movements fluid, and strangely silent for a man of his size. "You're 3 minutes early," he noted, pulling out a chair for me. "I like that. Punctuality is a sign of a disciplined mind." "And dressing your guests is a sign of a control freak," I retorted, sitting down. "But I'll admit, the silk is better than the poly blend the firm provides." Dominic sat across from me, the candlelight dancing in his whiskey-colored eyes. He didn't look like a CEO tonight. He looked restless. His shoulders were tight, and there was a subtle tension in his jaw that suggested he was fighting a very different kind of battle. "You're staring," he said, his voice a low vibration. "I'm observing," I corrected. "You're agitated. The audit files were clean, Dominic. If you're worried about me finding a hidden offshore account, you can relax. You're boringly legal." "It's not the accounts that are making me restless, Petra." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine. "It's the moon. It's 2 days out. My blood is loud." I froze. This was the first time he'd acknowledged what he was. No talk of shifters or packs, just the biological reality of it. And what does loud blood mean for me? Am I in danger of being dinner? Dominic's eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide until the whiskey color was almost swallowed by black. He leaned in, the heat coming off him in waves. "No, you're in no danger of being hurt, but my wolf, he doesn't care about tax returns. He cares about territory. And he cares about the fact that there is a female in his home who doesn't smell like fear." He finally closed the gap, his fingers sliding over the back of my hand. His skin was scorching. I should have pulled away. I should have made a joke, but the way he was looking at me, with a hunger that was so raw it felt like a physical touch, stripped away my defenses. "You smell like rain," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly, "and defiance. It's the most intoxicating thing I've ever encountered. Every time you snap at me, every time you look at me like I'm just a man, it makes me want to drop the act and show you exactly what I am." "Then show me," I whispered back, my heart hammering against my ribs. Stop talking about it and show me, Dominic. I'm not the other girls. I'm not going to faint if you stop being a gentleman. Dominic's chair screeched against the floor as he stood up, his hand gripping mine so hard it was almost painful. He didn't lead me to the bedroom. He pulled me toward the balcony, the glass doors sliding open to the cool night air. The city hummed below us, but all I could hear was the ragged sound of his breathing. He backed me against the stone railing, his body a solid wall of heat pressing against mine. He didn't kiss me. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply, his chest heaving. I'm trying so hard to be the man you want to audit. But the wolf, he wants to mark you. He wants the whole world to know you're his. I reached up, my fingers tangling in his thick hair, pulling his head back so he had to look at me. I'm nobody's, Dominic. If you want me, you have to earn me, and you don't earn me with a guest suite and a silk jumpsuit. His growl was low and primal, a sound that vibrated through my entire body. He leaned in, his lips a breath away from mine, his eyes wild and unfocused. Is that a challenge, Petra? It's a promise, I breathed. Before he could respond, his phone chimed, a sharp, insistent emergency tone. Dominic stiffened, his entire body turning to stone. He pulled back, his eyes clearing as he looked at the screen. "What is it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The northern perimeter," he said, his voice cold and flat. "One of the younger wolves. He's lost his head. He's in the lobby. He's looking for me." "So, you're the boss. Go deal with it." Dominic looked at me, a strange, dark look in his eyes. "He's not looking for a fight, Petra. He's in heat, and he's picked up your scent from the vents. He thinks you're unclaimed." Dominic's jaw set in a terrifying line. He reached for a heavy coat on the chair. "Stay here, lock the door. If anyone other than me knocks, do not answer." "Dominic, wait." But he was already gone, moving with a speed that was barely human. I stood on the balcony, the cold air biting at my skin, realizing that for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one in control. Chapter 4. The Primal Law. I didn't lock the door. If Dominic thought I was the kind of woman who would cower in a suite while he handled my honor, he had clearly audited the wrong person. I waited 30 seconds, then I kicked off my heels and grabbed a pair of heavy boots from the luggage Dominic had so thoughtfully provided. The elevator was keyed to his print, but I'd spent the last 3 years auditing security firms. I knew the override codes for Volkov's systems better than his own IT department. Within minutes, the gold-leafed doors were sliding open to the lobby. The scene was chaos, but a silent, terrifying kind of chaos. The security guards, all massive men I now realized were wolves, were standing in a wide circle, their heads bowed. In the center was a younger man, barely 20, his shirt torn and his skin flushed a deep, angry red. He was panting, his eyes darting around the room with a frantic, wild energy. And then there was Dominic. He stood 10 feet away from the boy, his overcoat flared like a cape, his presence so heavy it felt like the air in the lobby had turned to lead. He wasn't yelling, he was just being. The sheer weight of his alpha status was a physical force, pinning the younger wolf to the floor without a single touch. "She is not for you." Dominic's voice wasn't a growl, it was a tectonic shift. "She is mine, say it." The boy let out a whimper, his knees buckling. I can smell her, Alpha. She's everywhere. The air." "She is the air I breathe." Dominic stepped forward, and I saw his hands clench into fists, the veins standing out like ropes. "And if you even think of her name again, I will tear the memory from your throat. Do you understand?" The boy collapsed into a submissive heap, shivering. I stepped out of the elevator, the marble floor cold beneath my boots. Every head in the room snapped toward me. The scent hit the younger wolf again, and he let out a choked sound, his head lifting. But before he could even look at me, Dominic was there. He moved so fast it was a blur, stepping between me and the boy, his back to me like a living shield. "I told you to stay upstairs," he hissed, not looking back. "And I told you I don't take orders," I replied, my voice steady, despite the fact that my heart was trying to jump out of my chest. I stepped around him, facing the boy. The security guards shifted, a low rumble of warning echoing through the lobby. I ignored them. I walked straight up to the boy. I kneeled down in front of him. "Hey," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Look at me." The boy looked up, his eyes bloodshot and terrified. "I'm not a cent, and I'm not a prize," I told him, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm a woman with a very long list of things to do, and none of them involve you. You're going to the infirmary, you're going to take a sedative, and tomorrow you're going to apologize to your alpha for being a brat. Clear?" The boy blinked, the wildness in his eyes flickering. The human part of him seemed to catch a breath. He nodded slowly, his breathing evening out. "Take him," I said to the nearest guard. They hesitated, looking at Dominic. Dominic was staring at me, his expression unreadable, his chest heaving with a fury that was slowly being replaced by something else. He gave a sharp, curt nod, and 2 guards hurried the boy away. The lobby cleared in seconds, leaving only me and the Alpha King in the vast, silent space. Dominic turned to me, his eyes dark and swirling with emotion. "That was the stupidest thing I have ever seen," he growled, though the edge was gone. "He could have snapped. He was in a frenzy, Petra. He didn't see a woman. He saw a biological imperative. He saw what you allowed him to see," I countered, walking toward him until our chests touched. "You were treating him like a rival. I treated him like a human. That's the difference between us, Dominic. You rule with fear, I rule with common sense." Dominic grabbed my face in his hands, his thumbs pressing into my cheeks. He looked like he wanted to shake me and kiss me at the same time. "You don't understand the rules of this world. You walked into a den of hungry wolves and told them to sit. You have no idea what that does to them, or to me." "Then tell me," I whispered. Dominic didn't answer with words. He swept me up into his arms, his grip bruisingly tight, and started back toward the private elevator. He didn't stop at the guest suite. He went straight to the top floor, his private quarters. He kicked the door shut and pinned me against it, his mouth finally crashing onto mine. It wasn't the kiss of a CEO or a gentleman. It was a claim. It was rough, desperate, and tasted of salt and fire. I kissed him just as hard, my nails digging into his shoulders, matching his intensity move for move. He pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against mine. "The audit is over, Petra. I don't care about the papers. I don't care about the firm." "Oh," I panted, my hands sliding down to his belt. "Then what do you care about?" Dominic lifted me, my legs wrapping around his waist instinctively. "I care about the fact that the moon is rising, and I am finished trying to be a man." He carried me toward the massive bed, but just as he reached it, the lights in the entire penthouse flickered and died. A low, rhythmic thumping started from the roof, the sound of a helicopter landing. Dominic froze, his body tensing like a bowstring. "They're here." "Who?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dominic looked at me, his eyes glowing with a faint, natural amber light for the first time. "My father, and he didn't come to talk about the taxes." Chapter 5. The Architect of Shadows. The darkness in the penthouse was absolute, save for the rhythmic red strobe of the helicopter's landing lights reflecting off the glass walls. Dominic didn't put me down immediately. His grip tightened, his heart thundering against my chest like a trapped animal. The air had changed. It no longer smelled of rain and cedar. It smelled of ozone, an ancient cold iron. "My father," Dominic repeated, his voice dropping to a gravelly rasp. He set me on my feet, but his hand stayed anchored to the back of my neck. "Stay behind me. Do not speak. Do not breathe a word about the audit." "Dominic, you're shaking," I whispered, reaching up to touch his forearm. He wasn't shaking from fear. It was a vibration of pure, repressed power. "I'm not shaking, Petra. I'm holding back a landslide." The heavy double doors to the rooftop terrace hissed open. A man stepped in, followed by 4 guards that made Dominic's security look like mall cops. The newcomer was older, his hair a shock of silver, but his frame was just as massive as Dominic's. He wore a vintage wool overcoat and carried a cane with a silver wolf head pommel, not because he needed it for walking, but because it looked like a weapon. This was Victor Volkov, the man who'd built this empire on bone and grit, long before it was a corporate skyscraper. Victor didn't look at the room, he looked at me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and lacked even a hint of the warmth I'd found in Dominic's gaze. "So," Victor's voice was like stones grinding together in a deep well, "this is the little audit that has paralyzed my son. I expected a team of accountants, Dominic, not a distraction." Dominic stepped forward, his body completely obscuring me from his father's sight. The air in the room grew heavy, the pressure making my ears pop. "She's not a distraction, Victor. She's the best fixer in the city, and she's under my personal protection." Victor let out a dry, humorless bark of a laugh. He moved into the room, his cane clicking rhythmically across the hardwood floor. "Protection? You've moved her into your private quarters 2 days before the full moon. That's not protection, son. That's a claim, and a reckless one at that. You know the law. A human in the sanctum during the rising is an invitation for a challenge." "Let them challenge," Dominic growled. The sound was deeper than I'd ever heard it, a physical vibration that rattled the crystal glasses on the bar. I couldn't just stand there. My reckless choice reflex kicked in. I stepped out from behind Dominic, smoothing the silk of my jumpsuit. "Actually, Victor, if I can call you that, I'm not here for the moon. I'm here because your son's internal filing system is a disaster, and I don't leave a job half-finished." Dominic's hand twitched toward me, a silent command to shut up, but Victor stopped in his tracks. He looked me up and down, a predatory glint appearing in his eyes. "She talks, how charming, and she doesn't smell like she's about to faint." Victor leaned in, sniffing the air with an exaggerated, terrifying slow motion. "No fear, just irritation. You picked a strange one, Dominic." "She is mine," Dominic said, the words echoing with finality. Victor turned toward the balcony, looking out at the city he used to rule. "Then she's a liability, and liabilities are liquidated. You have 24 hours to decide if she's a queen or a corpse." The lights flickered back on, blindingly bright. When my eyes adjusted, Victor and his men were gone, leaving only the fading hum of the helicopter and the suffocating silence of the penthouse. Dominic turned to me, his face pale, his eyes glowing that haunting amber. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who had just been told he had to watch the woman he loved walk into a furnace. "What's the trial of the pack?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Dominic grabbed my shoulders, his grip almost bruising. "Something you are never going to do. We're leaving, now." "Dominic." He didn't listen. He pulled me toward the elevator, but as the doors opened, a group of his own men stood there, their arms crossed, their expressions grim. They didn't move to let us in. "The council has already voted, Alpha," his voice trembling but firm. "No one leaves the building until the trial is set." Chapter 6. The Weight of the Crown. The penthouse had gone from a sanctuary to a high-rise prison in the span of 5 minutes. Dominic was pacing the length of the floor-to-ceiling windows, his movements erratic and jagged. Every time he passed a piece of furniture, the air seemed to shimmer with his heat. "I can get us out," I said, sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, trying to keep my voice the picture of corporate calm. "There's a service freight elevator that bypasses the main lobby. If I can hack the—" "It isn't about the locks, Petra," Dominic snapped, turning to face me. He looked ragged. "They aren't guarding the doors with keycards, they're guarding them with their lives. My own men. They love me, but they fear the law more. If I try to force you out, they'll have to fight me. And if I kill my own pack to save you, I'm no longer an alpha. I'm a rogue, and rogues are hunted down and slaughtered." I stood up and walked to him, forcing him to stop. I took his face in my hands. His skin was burning. Then tell me what this trial is. If it's a physical fight, I can hold my own. I've been boxing since I was 10. I've taken down men twice my size. Dominic let out a dry, pained laugh, leaning his forehead against mine. It's not a boxing match, Sweetness. The trial of the pack is a hunt. You are given a head start in the lower levels of the city forest, the private Volkov estate. You have to reach the north gate before the sun rises. If you make it, you are recognized as a Luna, as my equal. And if I don't? Dominic's eyes shut tight. The pack is allowed to let their wolves lead. They won't use weapons. They'll use their senses. They'll hunt you like prey. They won't kill you, not if I'm there, but they will break you. They will humiliate you until you beg to leave. It's designed to prove a human is too fragile for our world. Then let them try, I said, my voice hardening. I've spent my whole life being told I'm in the wrong room, that I'm too small, that I'm just a girl. I didn't get to be a top fixer by being fragile. I got there by being the one who doesn't stop. Dominic pulled me into a crushing embrace, his face buried in my hair. You don't understand. Under the moon, they aren't men. They're animals. And the scent of you, it's going to drive them mad. Then be the animal that protects me, I whispered into his chest. You told me you're mine. Prove it. Don't run away. Stand with me. He pulled back, searching my face. The amber in his eyes was swirling, a mix of agony and a new, terrifying resolve. He didn't speak. Instead, he swept the items off the coffee table with one hand, vases and books crashing to the floor, and pulled me onto the hard surface. He didn't ask this time. He kissed me with a desperation that felt like a goodbye and a vow all at once. His hands were everywhere, tracing the lines of the silk jumpsuit, finding the zipper. I didn't stop him. I needed this. I needed to feel the heat of him, the solid, unyielding reality of his body before we were thrown into the dark. The intimacy was raw and urgent. There was no gentle lead-up, only the frantic need to belong to one another before the world tried to tear us apart. Dominic's possessiveness was no longer a game. It was a physical mark, his touch claiming every inch of my skin as his territory. As we lay there in the quiet aftermath, the moonlight began to spill across the floor, silver and cold. Dominic checked his watch. 6 hours until the sun sets, he murmured. 6 hours until the hunt begins. He pulled up to a hidden wall panel, punching in a code. The wall slid back to reveal a rack of tactical gear, not for him, but for me. If you're going to do this, you're going to do it my way. He pulled out a heavy, dark gray tactical suit and a pair of reinforced boots. And Petra? Yeah? If they get close, don't look them in the eye. It only makes them hungrier. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. It was Victor's voice, sounding almost bored. The council is downstairs, Dominic, and they've brought the hounds. It seems someone leaked the news that your human is special. They aren't just hunting for sport anymore. They're hunting to see if you'll fail the first rule of an alpha. Pack before mate. Chapter 7. The Edge of the Woods. The Volkov estate was a sprawling, ancient forest contained within high stone walls 20 miles outside the city. In the daylight, it was a billionaire's playground. At night, under a rising moon, it was a slaughterhouse. I stood at the edge of the tree line, the tactical suit tight against my skin, the boots laced high. I didn't feel like an auditor anymore. I felt like a soldier. Dominic stood beside me, dressed in simple black trousers and a thin shirt that was already straining against his muscles. He was already breathing differently, deeper, slower. Victor stood a few yards away, surrounded by 12 men. These weren't the corporate guards from the lobby. These were the hounds, the enforcers of the pack. They weren't wearing suits. They were bare-chested, their skin covered with ritualistic scars, their eyes already fixed on me with a terrifying, singular focus. "The rules are simple," Victor announced, his voice carrying through the damp forest air. "The girl has a 10-minute head start. She must reach the north gate. Dominic, you will stay here until the 10 minutes are up. You may protect her, but if you kill a pack brother to do it, the trial is forfeit, and she is banished. If she is caught, she is removed from the territory immediately. No second chances. Dominic turned to me. He didn't care about the hounds. He didn't care about his father. He grabbed my hand, his grip crushing. Run. Don't look back. Go for the creek. It'll mask your scent for a few hundred yards. I'll be right behind you. I know, I said, leaning in to kiss him one last time. It tasted of salt and the copper tang of adrenaline. See you at the gate. Go, he roared. I turned and bolted into the trees. The forest was a blur of dark pines and reaching branches. I didn't run like a victim. I ran like a hunter who knew the terrain. I hit the creek, the freezing water soaking my boots, and scrambled along the rocks. My lungs burned, but the fear I was supposed to feel was being drowned out by a cold, sharp anger. They wanted to see if I was fragile. I'd show them what a human liability looked like. 5 minutes in, I heard it. A howl broke the silence, not a magical sound, but a raw, biological scream of a predator starting the chase. Then another, then another. They were moving fast. I pushed harder, my vision tunneling. I climbed a steep embankment, my fingers digging into the mud, and rolled over the top just as I heard the crashing of brush below me. They were close, too close. I didn't keep running. I stopped. I knew I couldn't outrun them for miles. I pulled a small, heavy tactical flashlight from my belt, the only tool Dominic had allowed me. I waited. A massive shadow burst through the trees. It was one of the hounds, his face distorted by the beginning of a shift, his teeth bared. He didn't hesitate. He leaped. I didn't scream. I stepped into his space, just like I had with Dominic in the boardroom, and swung the heavy metal flashlight with everything I had. It connected with his temple with a sickening thud. He went down, skidding into the dirt, stunned but not dead. One, I whispered, my heart racing. I started running again, but the forest suddenly went silent. The howls stopped. I slowed down, my back against a tree, scanning the shadows. Something was wrong. The air felt too still. And then I smelt it, the cedar wood, the rain. Dominic stepped out from behind a massive oak, but he wasn't alone. He was covered in blood, not his own, and his shirt was shredded. His eyes weren't just amber, they were glowing with a fierce, terrifying light. "Petra," he panted, his voice a distorted growl. "Get down." "Dominic? What is—" Before I could finish, the ground beneath us exploded, not with a bomb, but with the force of 4 massive wolves hitting the clearing at once. They didn't go for me. They went for Dominic, and in the center of the clearing stood Victor, holding a silver whistle to his lips. "The trial has changed, Dominic. The pack doesn't want the girl. They want to know if their alpha is strong enough to keep her while he's being torn apart." Dominic let out a roar that shook the trees, throwing 2 men off him with a strength that was impossible. He looked at me, his face a mask of primal fury. "Run, Petra, the north gate. Don't stop for anything." I looked at him, surrounded by his own brothers, and then at the gate in the distance. I realized then that the trial wasn't for me, it was a trap for him. I didn't run for the gate. I ran back toward Dominic. Chapter 8. The Weight of the Blood. I didn't turn back because I was a martyr. I turned back because an audit is never finished until you account for the hidden variables, and Victor Volkov was the biggest, most corrupt variable in the room. "Petra, I said go." Dominic's voice was a ragged, terrifying sound, a mixture of a man's command and a predator's snarl. He had one hound in a headlock, his muscles bulging through his shredded shirt, while 2 others clung to his back, trying to bring the giant to his knees. I didn't listen. I never do. I didn't have a weapon, but I had a tactical flashlight and a very expensive education in human anatomy. I lunged at the nearest hound, the one trying to sink his teeth into Dominic's shoulder. I didn't swing for his head this time. I jammed the metal end of the light at the base of his nerve cluster. He let out a high-pitched yelp and collapsed, his body going limp as his nervous system rebooted. Dominic used the opening to throw the other 2 off him like they were annoying insects. He spun around, his eyes wild and bleeding amber light, his chest heaving. For a split second, I thought he might actually snap at me. The man I'd shared a bed with was buried under layers of ancient, territorial instinct. "You're supposed to be at the gate," he panted, his hand reaching out to grab my collar, pulling me flush against his heat. He smelled of sweat, copper, and the forest floor. If you stay here, they'll tear you apart just to get to me." "Then we'll be torn apart together," I snapped, wiping a smudge of mud from my cheek. "But I'm not running while you play punching bag for your father's ego. This isn't a trial, Dominic. It's a coup." Victor's laughter drifted through the trees, cold and dry. He was leaning on his cane, watching us with the detached interest of a scientist watching a lab rat. "A coup? No, Miss Petra. It's an evolution. An alpha who can be distracted by a single female is a weakness to the pack. If he can't protect his throne while protecting you, he deserves to lose both." "He isn't losing anything," I yelled back, stepping out from the shadow of Dominic's massive frame. "You're cheating, Victor. You changed the rules mid-game. That's not leadership, that's bad management." The hounds were circling again, their movements fluid and predatory. They weren't shifting, not fully, but their faces were distorted, their fingernails lengthened into claws. They were waiting for the signal. Dominic's grip on my arm tightened. "Petra, listen to me. The north gate is less than a mile through the ravine. If I hold them here, you can make it. Once you pass that gate, the trial is legally over. They can't touch you without declaring war on the council." "I'm not leaving you," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "Look at them, Dominic. They aren't going to stop if I leave. They're going to kill you." "Let them try," Dominic growled, his body beginning to vibrate with that subsonic frequency again. He shoved me toward the tree line. "Run. That's an alpha's order." "I don't take orders from alphas," I shot back, but before I could argue further, Victor raised the silver whistle again. The sound that came out wasn't a whistle, it was a frequency so high it made my ears bleed. Dominic let out a roar of agony, dropping to his knees and clutching his head. The hounds didn't seem affected, they lunged as one. I didn't think. I threw myself over Dominic, shielding his head with my body, as the first hound hit us. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. I felt a rib crack, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp gasp, but I didn't let go. I felt Dominic's arms wrap around me, pulling me underneath him as he collapsed. "Dominic!" I choked out. The world went dark as the hounds swarmed over us, a mountain of fur and muscle, and then the ground beneath us gave way. Chapter 9. The Ravine's Secret. The fall felt like it lasted a lifetime, but it ended in a freezing splash. The ravine wasn't just a ditch, it was an ancient, hidden drainage tunnel from the original estate, filled with 6 inches of stagnant, icy water. I hit the bottom hard, the air returning to my lungs with a painful wheeze. Beside me, Dominic groaned, the sound echoing off the moss-covered stone walls. The light from above was a narrow slit of silver moonlight. The hounds hadn't followed. Not yet. The drop was too steep for an easy descent, and the whistle seemed to have disoriented them as much as it had Dominic. "Petra?" Dominic's voice was a rasp. He was struggling to sit up, his shredded shirt clinging to his bloodied skin. "I'm still here," I managed, crawling toward him through the muck. "Everything hurts, but I'm still here." He reached out, his hand shaking, as he cupped my face. He checked me over with a frantic, tactile desperation, his thumbs brushing over my bruised jaw. You stayed, and you almost died. I told you, I don't leave a job half-finished, and your father is a massive prick, for the record." Dominic let out a short, wet laugh that turned into a cough. He pulled me into his lap, his heat the only thing keeping the hypothermia at bay. "He's the architect, Petra. He doesn't believe in love. He believes in bloodlines and power. To you, you're an infection, a weakness he needs to burn out of me." "Is that what I am? An infection?" Dominic leaned his forehead against mine, his eyes dimming back to their usual whiskey darkness. "You're the only thing that makes me feel like a man instead of a monster. That's what terrifies him. A king who loves is a king who can be hurt." We sat in the dark for a moment, the only sound the dripping of water and our synchronized, ragged breathing. The intimacy here, in the cold and the mud, felt more real than anything in the penthouse. It wasn't about silk jumpsuits or corporate power. It was just two people holding on to each other while the world tried to erase them. "We have to move," Dominic said, his body tensing as the sound of baying echoed from the top of the ravine. "The hounds will find the entrance to the tunnels. This leads to the old wine cellar under the main house. It's a shortcut to the north gate, but it's narrow." "Lead the way, Alpha," I said, pushing myself up. We moved through the tunnels in a blur of damp stone and shadows. Dominic stayed in front, his senses heightened, his hand constantly reaching back to ensure I was still there. He was moving with a limp, but his resolve was unbreakable. We reached a heavy iron grate. Dominic gripped the bars, his muscles rippling as he tore the rusted metal from the stone with a grunt of pure effort. We scrambled through into a cellar that smelled of dust and ancient grapes. "Almost there," he whispered. "The north gate is just across the lawn from the main entrance." But as we climbed the stairs into the main foyer of the estate, the lights flickered on. Victor was sitting in a high-backed leather chair in the center of the hall, a glass of amber liquor in one hand and his silver whistle in the other. Standing behind him were two men I didn't recognize, older, refined, but with eyes that held the same predatory weight as Victor's. The counsel. His mouth formed, his hand going to my waist. "You're late for the finish line, son," Victor said, taking a sip of his drink. "And you brought the liability into the sacred halls. That's a second violation." "The trial was compromised," Dominic said, his voice cold and steady. "You used the frequency. That's forbidden under the law of the pact." "I used a tool to test your focus," Victor countered, "and you failed. You chose her life over the victory. You chose the individual over the collective." One of the council members stepped forward, a tall man with a scar running through his eyebrow. "Dominic, the law is clear. If an alpha cannot prioritize the pack's safety, he must step down. Victor has proposed a temporary regency." "Over my dead body," Dominic growled. "That can be arranged," Victor said, standing up. He looked at me, a cruel smile on his face. "But first, we'll see how much she's worth to you. Councilman Ramsey, if you please." The scarred man didn't pull a weapon, he didn't shift. He simply snapped his fingers, and a massive black wolf, twice the size of any hound, burst through the glass. It didn't go for Dominic, it went straight for me. Chapter 10. The Apex Choice. The black wolf was a nightmare made of fur and muscle. It didn't bark. It was a silent, killing machine. Dominic moved, but the councilman, Ramsey, was faster. He didn't shift fully, but he moved with a speed that blurred the air, intercepting Dominic with a shoulder check that sent him crashing back into the cellar stairs. I had 3 seconds. I didn't run. Running from a wolf is like asking to be a chew toy. I grabbed the only thing within reach, a heavy, decorative brass coat rack by the door. The wolf leaped, its jaws wide enough to crush my skull. I didn't swing the rack like a club. I planted the base in the rug and aimed the hooks upward, using the wolf's own momentum against it. The beast slammed into the brass with a sickening thud, the hooks catching in its shoulder. It let out a roar of pain, tumbling to the side and taking the coat rack with it. I rolled to the left, glass shards cutting into my palms, and scrambled to my feet. "Petra!" Dominic roared, throwing Ramsey off him and lunging toward me. I didn't wait for him. I saw Victor reaching for his whistle again. I knew if he blew that thing now, Dominic wouldn't be able to stop the black wolf from finishing me. I ignored the wolf and ran straight for Victor. The council members looked stunned. No human had ever charged the aggregate. I didn't have a plan, just a target. As Victor lifted the whistle to his lips, I tackled him. We hit the floor hard. Victor was old, but he was still a wolf. He snarled, his hand catching me by the throat, his grip like a vice. "You arrogant little—" I didn't fight his grip. I reached for the hand holding the whistle and bit down on his thumb with everything I had. Victor let out a cry of shock, his grip loosening for a split second. I snatched the silver whistle from his hand and rolled away, gasping for air. "Dominic, catch!" I screamed, throwing the whistle across the room. Dominic caught it in midair. He didn't blow it, he crushed it in his fist, the silver twisting into a useless lump of metal. The black wolf, now recovered but limping, turned toward Dominic, but Ramsay held up a hand. The foyer went silent. The council members were looking at me, a bloodied, mud-covered human woman who had just disarmed the aggregate. "Enough," said Ramsay, his voice ringing with a new kind of authority. He looked at Victor, who was standing up, nursing his bleeding hand. "Victor, you said she was a liability. You said she was fragile." Victor's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "She's a nuisance. She's a warrior," Ramsay interrupted. He looked at Dominic, then at me. "She didn't run for the gate. She didn't hide. She defended the Alpha, and then she attacked the architect. By the ancient laws, she has passed the trial of the pack, not by reaching a gate, but by proving her spirit is equal to our own." Dominic walked to me, his chest heaving, his eyes back to their warm, whiskey brown. He wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me into his side with a possessiveness that was no longer a claim of ownership, but a claim of partnership. "The trial is over," Dominic said, his voice echoing through the foyer. "She is my Luna, and anyone who questions her place questions mine." Victor looked around the room, realizing he'd lost the room. The council members weren't looking at him with fear anymore. They were looking at us with respect. "This isn't over," Victor hissed, his eyes narrowed. "The pack won't accept a human as a leader." "Then we'll show them," I said, leaning my head against Dominic's shoulder, my hand finding his. "Starting with the audit of your private accounts, Victor, I found some very interesting discrepancies in the Northern Territories. I think the council would love to see where that money has been going." Victor's face went pale. Ramsay let out a short, appreciative laugh. "It seems the new Luna has teeth." Dominic leaned down, his lips brushing my temple. "You kept the files?" I said. "I never go anywhere without a backup." Dominic's eyes flared with heat, not the heat of the wolf, but the heat of a man who was utterly, completely in love with the woman beside him. He lifted my hand to his lips, kissing my bloodied knuckles. But as the council began to disperse, a low, ominous vibration started to shake the house. It wasn't a wolf. It was the sound of engines, dozens of them. Dominic's expression went from triumphant to dead serious in a heartbeat. He looked at the shattered windows. "What now?" I asked. "The Northern Pack," Dominic said, his grip tightening. "They're here for the vacuum. They think Victor's coup succeeded, and they've come to claim the city while we're weak." He looked at me, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "Ready for round 2, Luna?" Chapter 11. The Northern Tide. The roar of engines grew closer, shaking the very foundations of the old estate. Dominic's hand tightened on mine, but there was no fear in his eyes, only a cold, strategic calculation. This was his element, defending his territory. "The Northern Pack," Dominic repeated, his voice low, a primal edge to it. "They've been waiting for a chance to challenge our borders. They thought Victor would succeed in weakening me. This is their move." "So, more wolves?" I asked, looking out at the rapidly approaching headlights. "Just bigger ones?" "And less civilized," Dominic corrected, a grim line to his lips. "They don't adhere to the council's old-world laws. They respect only strength and blood. They'll expect a disorganized pack, weakened by infighting." "Well, that's exactly what you are, isn't it?" I pointed out, gesturing to Victor, who was still fuming in the corner, and the scattering council members who looked more interested in self-preservation than loyalty. Dominic's gaze hardened. "Then we'll give them a surprise. Ramsay," he barked, turning to the councilman, "rally the guards, form a perimeter at the main gate. Hold them for as long as you can. Tell them the Alpha still stands." Ramsey nodded, his eyes wide but determined. He barked orders into a comms unit, and the remaining Volkov guards, who had been hiding in the shadows, sprang into action. "Victor," Dominic's voice was lethal. "You caused this. Now you help me fix it. Your men still answer to you. Get them out there. If a single northern wolf breaches this property line, your regency will be the least of your concerns. I'll make sure you regret the day you ever thought you could challenge my bloodline." Victor's face twisted in disgust, but he saw the unyielding threat in Dominic's eyes. He snarled an order to his remaining guards, who, to my surprise, snapped to attention and moved with Ramsey toward the main entrance. "And you, Luna," Dominic turned to me, his hands settling on my shoulders. "You're going to stay here, in the main hall. It's the safest place." "Safest place for who?" I interrupted, shaking my head. "Dominic, I'm not a shield, I'm a fixer. I don't hide while the problem gets worse. What are their weaknesses? What do they want? Tell me everything." Dominic looked at me, his eyes flaring with that amber light. "They're wilder. They rely on brute force, not strategy. Their alpha, Lazarus, is a hothead. He's impulsive. He wants our territory, but he especially wants my resources." "Good," I said, a dangerous glint in my eye. "Then we give him something else to want." Dominic stared at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You have a plan, don't you?" "I always have a plan," I grinned. "Get me a comms unit and tell me where the server room is." Dominic didn't argue. He led me through the mansion's opulent halls, his hand guiding me, his steps silent despite the chaos outside. He took me to a sleek, hidden server room filled with blinking lights and humming machines. He handed me a headset, then stopped me before I could start. "Petra," he said, his voice dropping, his eyes burning into mine. I reached up, pulling his head down until our lips met. The kiss was quick, desperate, and tasted of the imminent battle. "Don't you dare finish that sentence, Volkov. Just make sure you survive, and don't you dare lose my property." He pulled back, a fierce grin on his face. "Never. I'll be out there, holding the line. You just make sure Lazarus regrets the day he ever tried to sniff around my territory." Dominic turned and left, disappearing into the heart of the mansion. I slipped on the headset, my fingers flying over the console. This wasn't about claws and teeth. It was about information and leverage. I hacked into the external comms, listening to the Northern Pack's frantic exchanges. They were indeed expecting minimal resistance. They thought they had Dominic cornered. "Time for a little corporate espionage," I muttered, my fingers dancing across the keyboard. I found their financial records, sloppy, disorganized, rife with illegal offshore accounts and smuggling operations. Exactly what I needed. I opened a secure anonymous channel and patched into the comms frequency of Lazarus, the Northern Alpha. "Alpha Lazarus," I said, my voice calm, confident, and utterly devoid of fear. "This is Petra. I believe you're currently trying to break into the wrong party." A roar of static, and then, "Who the hell is this? Where's Volkov, you coward?" "Oh, Dominic's busy. He's preparing to clean up your mess. But before he starts, I thought you might want to see what else I've found. I have the complete records of your illegal resource extraction from the Eastern Territories, your unsanctioned poaching, and a very damning email exchange with a certain disgraced human senator, all of which I'm about to leak to every major news outlet and the Human Regulatory Commission." A stunned silence on the other end. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I tapped a few more keys. "Your assets will be frozen by morning, your territory will be under investigation by dawn, and your pack will be fighting a war on two fronts, Dominic Volkov's rage and the human authorities who will dismantle you piece by piece, all because you decided to invade the wrong Alpha's territory on the wrong night." I heard frantic whispers on Lazarus's comms, then his voice again, laced with a new kind of terror. "What do you want?" I said, my voice ice cold. "Now, take your wolves and leave Volkov territory, and in return, your dirty laundry stays buried. Understood?" Another tense silence, then a frustrated snarl. "And if I don't?" "Then I push send, and you lose everything. Tick-tock, Alpha. The moon waits for no man. Chapter 12. The Retreat and the Aftermath. The silence on Lazarus's comms was deafening. I could hear his ragged breathing, the muffled shouts of his lieutenants in the background. He was cornered, and he knew it. My bluff wasn't a bluff. I had the goods, and he knew a human legal war could dismantle him faster and more permanently than any alpha brawl. Fine, Lazarus roared, the word ripped from him. We're pulling back, but this isn't over, Volkov. It is if you ever set foot on this land again, I responded, my voice calm and steady. Your pack answers to you, Alpha. Make sure they understand the consequences of their leader's bad decisions. I cut the comms. The rush of adrenaline was intense, making my hands tremble. I had just single-handedly diffused a full-scale territorial war, and I hadn't even had to raise my voice. The power felt good, intoxicating even. Just as the last engine roar of the northern pack faded into the distance, Dominic burst back into the server room. He was a whirlwind of mud, sweat, and raw, barely contained power. His shirt was still shredded, revealing the play of muscles across his chest, and his eyes were blazing amber. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice a low growl, but there was a hint of awe in it. "I showed them their financial statements," I said, leaning back in the chair, a triumphant smirk on my face. "Turns out, Alpha Lazarus is an excellent brute, but a terrible accountant." He pulled back. "The war is over." Dominic stared at me, his breathing slowly evening out. The amber in his eyes softened, replaced with a warm, deep whiskey color. He walked over, pulling me out of the chair and into his arms. He didn't say a word, he just held me, burying his face in my hair, inhaling deeply. "You smell like victory," he murmured, his voice hoarse, and defiance. "My father was right. You are an infection, the most beautiful infection I've ever caught." I wrapped my arms around his waist, reveling in the solid, reassuring weight of him. "And you, Alpha, are an absolute mess. Did you at least get a few good punches in?" He pulled back, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I ensured they understood the cost of underestimating my pack and my Luna. He ran his thumb over a bruise blooming on my jaw. "And you, for the record, are just as much of a mess. You broke a rib, didn't you?" I winced slightly. "Maybe. Nothing a few days of ignoring won't fix." He let out a soft chuckle, then his expression turned serious. "Petra, what you did out there. No human has ever commanded an alpha like that, not even Victor. You didn't just win a fight, you won a war without drawing blood. That kind of power, it scares them, and it drives me absolutely insane." He leaned down, his lips brushing mine. "Every time you defy me, every time you surprise me, my wolf screams your name." "Is that a good thing?" I whispered, my heart hammering. "It's everything," he breathed. He didn't just kiss me this time. It was a kiss of utter relief, desperate hunger, and a raw, possessive love that vibrated through every cell of my body. It was a total surrender of both of us, a melding of two powerful wills that finally found peace in each other. It wasn't gentle, it was a claiming, a promise, and a complete soul-deep acknowledgement that we were irrevocably tied. When he finally pulled away, gasping for air, he lifted me into his arms, carrying me out of the server room. "Let's go somewhere private, somewhere where the only sound is us." We didn't go back to his bedroom. He carried me to a hidden suite on the lower level, a sprawling, decadent space with a massive sunken tub that looked like it belonged in a Roman bathhouse. Candles were already lit, a faint, sweet scent filling the air. "I had this prepared for emergencies," he said, setting me down gently. "After the trial, after the attack, I figured we both needed a place to just exist." He started the water, the steam rising to fog the opulent room. He didn't say a word, just began unzipping my shredded tactical suit, his movements slow, reverent. I watched him, my own hands reaching for the buttons of his tattered shirt. "Dominic," my voice thick with emotion, "this isn't an emergency. This is everything. He peeled the suit from my bruised body, his eyes tracing every mark, every cut. He didn't look away from my imperfections. He adored them. When he finally stripped away the last piece of fabric, he paused, his gaze burning over my naked skin. "You are beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single defiant inch of you." He stepped into the tub first, the warm water swirling around his powerful body. Then he reached for me, pulling me in until I was seated between his legs, my back against his chest. The water was a balm, soothing my aching muscles. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me impossibly close. "The war might be over for now," he murmured, his lips brushing my wet hair, "but the real challenge has just begun, Luna. You're mine, and I intend to show you exactly what that means." He turned me in his arms, his eyes locking with mine. "You don't have to fight me anymore, Petra. Just let me love you." I looked at him, battered, powerful, utterly devoted, and for the first time I felt a surrender that wasn't weakness, but strength. I leaned in, kissing him deeply, pulling him closer until there was no space left between us. The water shifted, a gentle current swirling around our bodies. It wasn't magic, just the subtle shift in the water as the temperature changed. But in that moment, it felt like the world was moving just for us. Chapter 13. The New Morning. The morning after was a blur of aching muscles and a profound sense of peace. I woke tangled in Dominic's limbs, his heavy arm draped possessively over my waist, his scent, my scent now, filling my lungs. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the private suite, casting golden light over the rumpled silk sheets. I traced the scars on his chest, the ones I hadn't noticed in the heat of battle. They told stories of a life far more brutal than my own. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and a soft, possessive smile touched his lips. "Morning, Luna," he rumbled, his voice thick with sleep. He pulled me closer, burying his face in my hair again. "Did you manage to freeze all of Lazarus's assets yet?" "Working on it," I mumbled, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "Though, for the record, I think I've earned a break from corporate espionage." "You've earned anything you want," he corrected, his hand tracing the curve of my hip. "But unfortunately, the world doesn't stop just because its alpha has finally found his mate." He pushed himself up on one elbow, his eyes serious. "Victor will be back. The council will convene again, and the pack will need to understand what happened last night. They saw you, they felt your courage, but they also felt the violation of their ancient laws. I need you to stand by me, not just as my mate, but as my equal, as the woman who commands their respect, not just their fear." "And if they don't give it?" I challenged, sitting up.
Dominic turned, his eyes burning with that familiar amber glow. "Then they will learn. You broke the rules, Petra. You defied everyone. And because of that, you opened my eyes to a new way of ruling. I don't want a pack that cowers. I want a pack that questions, that challenges, that grows. And you are the one who will help me build it." He walked back to the bed, pulling me into his arms again. "But first," he whispered, his lips brushing my ear, "a shower. And then we go face them, together." I felt a thrill of excitement, not just from his touch, but from the challenge in his words. This wasn't just about love, it was about building an empire, side by side. As we stepped into the steaming shower, Dominic's hands found the bruise on my ribs. He frowned. "That's a deep one. Did you really break a rib?" "Probably," I admitted, "but it just proves I'm tougher than I look, doesn't it?" He kissed the bruise gently, then looked at me, his eyes full of a possessive adoration that made my knees weak. "It proves you're everything I didn't know I needed, my fierce, impossible Luna." The shower steamed up, obscuring the world outside. For a brief moment, it was just us, cleansing away the mud and blood of the night, preparing for the challenges of the day. But as the water ran, a discreet encrypted message appeared on Dominic's bedside tablet, which he had thoughtlessly left open. It was from Ramsey. "Alpha. Victor has locked down the main server in the city tower. All Volkov finances are inaccessible. He's made his move. He's cut you off." Dominic reached for the tablet, his eyes narrowing as he read the message. He looked at me, a dark, dangerous glint in his gaze. "He wants another war, doesn't he?" I asked, seeing the fury building in his eyes. Dominic's jaw tightened. "He wants to see if my Luna can function without her alpha's resources. He wants to see if you can still fix a problem when the entire system is designed to break you." He looked at me, a challenge in his eyes. "Ready for round 2, Petra? Because this time, it's personal."
Chapter 14. The Digital Siege. The steam from the shower was still clinging to the mirror when Dominic's hand tightened around the tablet, the plastic creaking under his grip. Victor hadn't just fired a warning shot, he'd cut the oxygen to the entire empire. In the modern world, an alpha without access to his capital was just a man with a very expensive, very silent phone. "He thinks he's clever," I said, stepping out of the shower and wrapping myself in a thick, white robe. I didn't wait for Dominic to spiral into a rage. I snatched the tablet from him, my wet hair dripping onto the screen. "He's trying to starve the pack so they'll turn on you for their next meal. Classic scorched earth policy." Dominic stood there, water sluicing off his scarred shoulders, looking like a god of war who had just been told his lightning bolts were on back order. "The payroll for the entire security force is processed through that server, the healthcare for the pack elders, the leases on the safe houses, everything. If I can't pay them by noon, the loyalty I just earned at the North Gate will evaporate." "Then it's a good thing you didn't mate with a cheerleader," I snapped, already walking toward the bedroom's vanity where my backup laptop sat. I flipped it open, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. "Victor thinks because he built the walls, he owns the fortress. But I'm a fixer, Dominic. I don't use the front door." Dominic loomed over me, his presence a heavy, warm weight. He smelled like expensive soap and impending violence. "He's using a 256-bit encryption layer designed by the military. My own IT team said it would take months to crack." "Your IT team works for a salary. I work for spite," I muttered, my fingers already flying across the keys. "Victor's old school. He believes in unbreakable locks. He doesn't realize that every lock is just a conversation between two machines, and I'm very good at winning arguments." I bypassed the main firewall within 3 minutes, but as I hit the secondary layer, the screen turned a deep blood red. A single line of text appeared. "Property of the architect. Unauthorized access is a declaration of war." "He's watching the port," I whispered, a thrill of adrenaline spiking through the exhaustion. "He's sitting in the city tower right now, waiting for me to trip the wire." "Petra, if he tracks that IP to this estate, he can authorize a security sweep by the human authorities," Dominic warned, his hand resting on my shoulder. His thumb traced the line of my collarbone, a grounding touch in the middle of the digital chaos. "I can't fight the city police and the Northern Pack at the same time." "Then we don't give him an IP to track." I looked up at Dominic, a wicked smirk playing on my lips. "We're going to the city. We need to be physically inside the tower. I need to plug directly into the mainframe." Dominic's jaw set. "It's a fortress. He has his loyalists on every floor." "Then it's a good thing you're the Alpha King," I said, standing up and dropping the robe. I reached for the tactical gear I'd worn in the forest, still damp but functional. "We aren't going in as auditors this time. We're going in as the owners. You provide the distraction, I provide the lobotomy to his system." Dominic watched me dress, his eyes darkening with a mix of pride and primal hunger. He reached out, pulling me into a hard, brief kiss that tasted of iron and ambition. "If we do this, there's no going back. It's a total takeover." I was never planning on a partial one. I breathed against his lips. We moved fast. Dominic coordinated with Ramsey via a secure analog line. The plan was simple. Dominic would enter through the front lobby, drawing every eye and every guard to his presence, while I used the rooftop helipad access, the one Victor used to surprise us. As we boarded the blacked-out SUV, the city skyline loomed in the distance like a challenge. Dominic checked the slide on his sidearm, a habit though he'd rather use his hands. 20 minutes to the tower. Dominic's voice was a low vibration. Suddenly, my laptop chirped. I looked down and my blood ran cold. Victor wasn't just locking the accounts, he was draining them. A live ticker showed millions of dollars flowing out of the Volkov Foundation and into an untraceable offshore account. He's liquidating the pack, I hissed. He's going to leave you with an empty kingdom of empty pockets. Dominic's eyes flared amber, a low growl escaping his throat. He looked at the driver. Faster.
Chapter 15. The Lion's Den. Volkov Tower didn't just look like a corporate headquarters, it looked like a tomb. The glass was tinted so dark it was impossible to see inside, and the air around the base of the building felt stagnant, charged with the scent of too many wolves in a confined space. 5 minutes, Dominic said, checking his watch. He looked at me, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second. Once I step into that lobby, every guard in this building is going to have one objective, keeping me away from the elevator. You'll have a 3-minute window to clear the helipad stairs. Make it 2, I said, checking the wireless uplink device in my pocket. I don't like keeping the king waiting. Dominic stepped out of the vehicle, and I watched through the tinted glass as he walked toward the revolving doors. He didn't look like he was going to a meeting. He looked like he was going to a feast. The moment he entered the lobby, the tension was visible even from the street. Guards scrambled, radios were pulled, and the public was shoved aside. I didn't wait to see the first blow. I slipped out of the SUV and headed for the service alley. The climb up the fire escape was a blur of burning lungs and clanking metal. I reached the roof just as the sound of a struggle echoed from the vents. Dominic was making his move. I bypassed the helipad lock with a physical override tool, slipping into the stairwell. The 50th floor was silent. This was the heart of the machine, the server room. I reached the reinforced glass doors, but they didn't open. I saw a figure standing inside, silhouetted by the flickering green lights of the servers. It wasn't a guard, it was Victor. He was holding a tablet, a calm, satisfied smile on his face. He pressed a button, and the intercom in the hallway hissed to life. "You really are predictable, Miss Petra. I knew Dominic couldn't resist a frontal assault, and I knew you couldn't resist the bait of the servers. You think you're here to save the pack? You're here to witness their end." "Open the door, Victor," I said, stepping up to the glass. "You're stealing from your own blood. Even for a wolf, that's low." "I'm not stealing. I'm relocating. A pack that follows a man controlled by a human deserves to starve. Once the accounts are empty, I'll offer them a choice: follow me to the north or die in the streets of this city." I looked at the server racks behind him. The lights were blinking frantically. The liquidation was at 80%. "You think I'm just an auditor," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I pulled the uplink device from my pocket and pressed it against the magnetic sensor of the door. Victor's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "The Northern Pack," I said, a smirk spreading across my face. "I didn't just threaten Lazarus, I planted a worm in his system. And since you were so eager to transfer funds to untraceable Northern accounts, you just gave me a direct bridge into your private encrypted vault." I hit enter on the device. Inside the room, the server lights turned from green to a frantic, flashing purple. Victor looked down at his tablet, his eyes widening in shock. "What is this? Stop it!" "I'm not just stopping the transfer, Victor. I'm reversing it. And I'm adding a little something extra. A complete broadcast of your private logs to every screen in this building. Let's see how loyal your guards are when they see you calling them disposable livestock in your personal notes." The glass door hissed open as the system crashed. I stepped in, my heart hammering. Victor lunged at me, his face contorting into a mask of lupine rage. He didn't use a cane this time, he used his claws. I dived to the side, my tactical suit taking a graze that would have shredded my skin. I reached for a heavy fire extinguisher on the wall, but before I could swing, the far door to the server room exploded off its hinges. Dominic was there. He was covered in blood, most of it not his, and his shirt was gone, his torso a map of fresh scratches and bruises. He looked like the devil himself had come to collect a debt. "Get away from her," Dominic roared. Victor didn't back down. He turned to face his son, his eyes glowing a sickly pale yellow. "You've ruined everything for a human girl, Dominic. You've destroyed our legacy." "No," Dominic said, stepping over the threshold, his presence filling the room with a suffocating heat. "I've just ended yours." They collided in the center of the room, a brutal, visceral explosion of strength and teeth. This wasn't a corporate takeover anymore. It was a family execution. Chapter 16. The Apex Legacy. The fight was a blur of raw power and ancient resentment. Dominic and Victor weren't using strategy. They were using the kind of violence that only comes from a lifetime of suppressed hatred. Every blow that landed sounded like a car crash. Victor was older, but he had the desperation of a man losing his religion. Dominic had the strength of a man who had finally found something worth killing for. I stayed low, my fingers flying over the main console, even as the room shook with their struggle. "Come on, just 10 more seconds," I hissed. The reversal was at 95%. The money was flowing back into the pack accounts, but I was doing more than that. I was hard-coding a new set of protocols. No one, not even Dominic, would be able to move these funds without dual authorization. He wanted an equal, I was giving him a system that required one. A crash behind me made me spin around. Victor had been thrown into a server rack, the metal groaning as it buckled. He was panting, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead, his eyes wild. Dominic stood over him, his chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding. "It's over, Victor," Dominic said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "The pack knows. Look." He gestured to the monitors lining the walls. Across every screen in the building, Victor's private communications were scrolling in bright white text. The insults, the plans to abandon the elders, the deals with rival packs, it was all there for every guard and every wolf in the tower. The building, which had been a cacophony of fighting seconds ago, suddenly went silent. The weight of the betrayal was heavier than any Alpha command. Victor looked at the screens, his face turning a ghostly pale. He looked at Dominic, then at me. For a moment, the madness cleared, replaced by a hollow, broken realization. He had lost the only thing that mattered to him, his shadow. You think she'll stay?" Victor wheezed, a pathetic, bloody smirk appearing on his lips. "She's human, Dominic. She'll age, she'll wither, and you'll be left with a kingdom of ghosts and the memory of a woman who is too small for your world." Dominic didn't flinch. He walked to me, his hand finding the back of my neck, pulling me into his side. He looked down at his father with a pity that was more cutting than any blade. "She's the only thing in this world that isn't a ghost, Victor, and I'd rather have a decade with her than an eternity with a man like you." Dominic turned to the intercom. "Ramsey, take him. He's to be held in the northern cells. No visitors, no communication. He's a rogue now." The doors opened and 4 guards stepped in. They didn't look at Victor with fear anymore. They looked at him with disgust. They hauled the former architect out of the room, leaving me and Dominic in the wreckage of the digital heart of the city. Dominic let out a long, shuddering breath, his head dropping onto my shoulder. The heat coming off him was immense. "Is it done?" "The money is back," I said, leaning my head against his. "And the protocols are updated. You're officially the most transparent Alpha in history." Dominic let out a tired, genuine laugh. He pulled back, looking at me with an intensity that made my heart skip. "You did it. You took down the architect with a laptop and a grudge." "I took him down because he threatened my property," I said, a smirk playing on my lips. Dominic's eyes flared with a sudden, dark heat. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed the front of my tactical suit and pulled me into a kiss that tasted of victory and raw, unbridled relief. It was a claiming that had nothing to do with pacts or laws, and everything to do with the two of us. But as he pulled me closer, the building suddenly lurched. A deep, subterranean boom echoed from far below, followed by the screech of twisting metal.
The screens in the room flickered, and a new alert popped up, one I hadn't programmed. System override, self-destruct initiated, facility evacuation required. Dominic and I looked at each other. Victor hadn't just relocated the money, he had rigged the building's foundation. "He's bringing the whole thing down," I whispered. "Not today," Dominic growled, grabbing my hand and heading for the stairs. As the lights began to fail and the scent of smoke began to fill the pristine hallways, the Alpha King and his Luna had won the war, but the fortress was falling around them. Chapter 17. The Fall of the Volkov Tower. The elevator shafts screamed as the structural steel of the Volkov Tower began to twist. Victor hadn't just been a thief, he was a spiteful god who decided that if he couldn't rule the mountain, no one would. The subterranean boom had sent a shockwave up the spine of the building, and now the floor beneath our feet felt more like a ship in a storm than a corporate headquarters. "The roof!" Dominic shouted over the roar of collapsing drywall and the high-pitched whine of failing electronics. "The stairwells are going to be a funnel for the smoke. We have to get to the helipad." "We can't just leave," I yelled back, my boots slipping on a patch of spilled hydraulic fluid. "Ramsey and the others, the lower floors are still full of staff." Dominic grabbed my hand, his grip so tight it would have crushed a weaker woman's bones. His eyes were wide, the amber light within them flashing like a warning beacon. "Ramsey knows the protocol, Petra. He's getting them to the sub-level bunkers. They're reinforced for earthquakes. The tower will collapse outward. Petra, we are the ones in the kill zone." We sprinted back toward the emergency stairs, the air already thick with the acrid scent of burning insulation and pulverized concrete. The building groaned again, a deep metallic sound that felt like it was coming from the very earth itself. Every time the tower swayed, my stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. We hit the stairwell, and the heat hit us like a physical blow. The fires from the lower-level explosions were rising, fueled by the oxygen being sucked down the central shafts. "I have the codes to the backup generator," I panted, my lungs burning. "If I can just get to the terminal on 52, I can trigger the external fire suppression. It might buy the bunkers more time." "There's no time, Petra." Dominic lunged for the door to the 52nd floor, but the frame had warped. He didn't use a key, he put his shoulder into the reinforced steel and roared. The hinges shrieked as they were ripped from the masonry, and the door flew open, clattering across the floor. The 52nd floor was a nightmare of shattered glass and emergency lighting. I dove for a terminal near the reception desk, my fingers flying over a keypad that was half melted. "Come on, you piece of junk," I hissed. The screen flickered, a skeletal version of the Volkov OS appearing. I didn't need a full interface, I just needed the command line. I typed in the override, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Fire suppression, level 1 through 10, active. Bunkers sealed." "Petra, now!" Dominic was at the window, watching the skyline. The building took another violent lurch, and a massive crack snaked across the ceiling. A chunk of plaster the size of a suitcase fell, narrowly missing my head. I hit enter and scrambled to my feet. "Done! Let's go!" We didn't go back to the stairs. Dominic grabbed a heavy executive chair and hurled it through the floor-to-ceiling glass. The window shattered into a million diamonds, the roar of the wind at 50 stories up instantly filling the room. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed me by the waist and pulled me toward the edge. Below us, the city looked like a miniature toy set, the streets filled with emergency lights and the tiny ant-like figures of people fleeing the zone. "The helipad is on the secondary spire," Dominic shouted, pointing to a smaller platform 10 feet away and slightly below our current level. The gap was a terrifying chasm of nothingness. "We have to jump before the main spire buckles." "You're insane," I yelled, the wind whipping my hair across my face. "That's a 10-foot gap." "I'm an alpha," Dominic roared, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that stripped away my fear. "And you're my Luna. We don't fall, Petra. We fly." He didn't give me time to argue. He stepped back, pulled me flush against his chest, and ran. We hit the edge of the shattered glass, and for a heartbeat, there was nothing but the cold morning air and the terrifying weightlessness of the drop. We slammed onto the secondary helipad with a bone-jarring impact. Dominic took the brunt of it, rolling across the concrete and keeping me shielded in his arms. I gasped for air, my ribs screaming, but we were alive. We scrambled to our feet just in time to see the main spire of the Volkov Tower begin to tilt. It moved in slow motion, a billion-dollar monument to ego and power finally giving up the ghost. "The chopper!" I pointed to the sleek black Volkov transport already idling on the pad. The pilot was frantically waving us over. We sprinted for the aircraft, the rotors kicking up a cyclonic wind. Dominic shoved me into the back seat and dived in after me. As the pilot pulled the collective and the chopper rose into the air, the main tower gave way. It didn't just fall, it imploded. A cloud of gray dust and debris billowed upward, swallowing the lower blocks of the city. My heart sank as I watched the place where I had first challenged Dominic vanish into a graveyard of steel. Dominic pulled me against him, his chest heaving, his gaze fixed on the tablet I was still clutching. The screen had flickered back to life, but it wasn't showing the bank accounts or the fire suppression systems. It was a live video feed from the northern perimeter of the estate. A fleet of unmarked black armored vehicles was breaching the gates, not wolves, but humans, and they were carrying high-frequency sonic disruptors and silver-lined containment nets. "Not over," Dominic growled, his voice turning into something truly monstrous. "The human authorities aren't here to help. Victor didn't just liquidate the money, Petra. He sold our coordinates to the extinction teams." Chapter 18. The Apex Union. The vibration of the helicopter's rotors felt like a death rattle as I stared at the thermal feed. Victor hadn't just burned his own house down, he had invited the exterminators to the funeral. The extinction teams, a black-budget paramilitary group funded by humans who feared the shadow world, were swarming the estate like a virus. They didn't want to audit the Volkovs, they wanted to erase the species. "They think we're weak," Dominic growled, his voice dropping into a register that made the helicopter's floorboards hum. He wasn't looking at the destruction of his tower anymore. He was looking at the screen, his eyes burning with a dark, focused amber. "They think because the tower fell, the pack has no heart." "They're using the chaos of the collapse as cover," I said, my fingers flying over the tablet's cracked screen. "But they're making a massive tactical error. They're using our internal network to coordinate their strike. Victor gave them the keys, but he forgot I changed the locks 10 minutes ago." Dominic turned to the pilot, his hand gripping the back of the seat. "Drop us at the North Ridge, low hover. Petra, what can you give me?" "I can shut down their comms, scramble their GPS, and, if I'm feeling particularly petty, I can trigger the estate's automated irrigation system to flood the lower perimeter with 5,000 gallons of reclaimed gray water. It won't kill them, but it'll turn their tactical boots into anchors." Dominic let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. He leaned over, grabbing my face in his hands and pressing a hard, bruising kiss to my forehead. "Do it. Show them why you don't mess with an auditor's territory." As the chopper banked toward the estate, I hit the final sequence. On the screen, the black icons of the armored vehicles began to spin in circles. Below us, in the forest I had just run through for my life, the high-intensity floodlights of the extinction teams flickered and died. The sonic disruptors they were relying on to paralyze the wolves suddenly let out a feedback screech so loud I could hear it over the rotors. We jumped while the chopper was still 6 feet off the ground. We hit the dirt of the North Ridge as a united front. Ramsey and the hounds were already there, emerging from the shadows of the bunkers. They looked battered, covered in the dust of the city, but the moment they saw Dominic, shirtless, scarred, and radiating the heat of a sun, they stood taller. Dominic didn't give a speech. He didn't have to. He looked at his men, then he looked at me. The humans came for a cowering pack. Instead, they found a queen, and she's already dismantled their toys. Now, we show them how we handle trespassers. The next hour wasn't a battle, it was an eviction. Without their tech, the tactical teams were just men in heavy suits, lost in a dark forest owned by predators.
Dominic and his men moved like shadows, stripping away their weapons and herding them back toward the gates with the sheer weight of their presence. No guns were fired, no grenades were thrown. It was a display of absolute, overwhelming physical dominance. I stayed at the ridge, my laptop perched on a mossy rock, directing the pack via the comms I'd hijacked. I watched through the estate's cameras as the last armored vehicles sped away, its tires spinning in the mud I'd created. The sun began to crest over the horizon, painting the forest in shades of gold and copper. The extinction was over. The Volkov Empire was a pile of rubble in the city, but the pack, the actual living heart of it, was standing in a circle in the clearing.
Dominic walked toward me, his chest heaving, his skin covered in the soot of the morning. He looked at the smoking ruins of his tower on the distant skyline, then back at the forest. "The money is safe," I said, closing the laptop with a definitive click. "The pack is alive, and Victor is in a cell he can't talk his way out of." Dominic didn't say anything. He just pulled me into his arms, lifting me off the ground and burying his face in the crook of my neck. We stood there for a long time, the only two people in the world who understood the cost of the last 24 hours. "I have nothing left but this land and this pack," he whispered into my skin. I pulled back, framing his face with my hands. I looked at the Alpha King, the man who had started as a feared monster and ended as the only man I'd ever truly respected. "You have a fixer, Dominic," I said, a slow, fierce smirk spreading across my face. "And we have enough capital in those northern accounts to build something much better than a tower. We're going to build a sanctuary, a place where fragile humans and monstrous alphas don't just survive, they rule." Dominic's eyes flared with a heat that had nothing to do with the wolf and everything to do with the woman in his arms. He swept me up, carrying me toward the main house, the one part of his legacy that still stood. "Then let's get to work, Luna," he murmured, his lips finding mine in a kiss that tasted of a new beginning. The audit was over, the books were balanced, and for the first time in his life, the most feared alpha in the world had found something he couldn't intimidate, couldn't buy, and would never, ever let go of.
Like and subscribe for more. Don't forget to leave a comment. Let us know what part you loved best. Stay fierce, stay zesty. Z.